Welcome to the Matthew Moran podcast. Here you will find a series of in-depth conversations with the world's best nature photographers, conservationists, designers, editors, writers, and publishers. You will get an insight into the lives of creative professionals and industry experts, and it is a chance to hear their stories, personal journeys, and how they carve a niche to make a living in a rapidly changing, highly competitive, but hugely exciting field. I've had the pleasure of working with many of my guests over the years, and I've learned so much from spending time with them and having conversations about what it means to be a creative freelancer, sourcing exciting projects, sharing skills through partnerships, and not losing sight of your goals and dreams. This podcast is my chance to share these conversations with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Today my guest is Bertie Gregory. Bertie is a filmmaker, photographer, and presenter who at the age of 25 already has 3 online TV series for National Geographic. These series have reached millions of viewers worldwide, and his third, The Big Freeze, which is just out this week, will no doubt reach millions more. If you thought that was impressive, Bertie has also worked on many of the BBC Natural History Unit's landmark series, including Planet Earth 2, Wild Cities, and 7 Worlds, 1 Planet. Despite reaching these heady heights, Bertie's feet remain firmly on the ground, and he understands and advocates the need to reach viewers by filming charismatic species in spectacular settings, but at the same time driving home a strong conservation message. Bertie felt fortunate that he always knew exactly what he wanted to do for a living from a young age, and at 17 he was taken on as a young member for the 2020 Vision Initiative that brought together the best British wildlife photographers to promote the UK's wildlife and habitats. This is something you can hear about in more detail with my conversation with Pete Cairns in podcast number 11. So after graduating from Bristol University with a degree in zoology, Bertie didn't hang about securing his first commission working alongside Steve Winter for National Geographic. Bertie learned quickly on the job, moving away from stills and deeper into filmmaking and presenting. And together with Steve, they co-presented on 2 one-hour specials on jaguars in the Pantanal and the city leopards of Mumbai. Bertie had an appetite for getting things done, and it wasn't long before he was presenting his own series for Nat Geo, which he talks about further in this interview. I met up with Bertie in Bristol to talk about his life as a filmmaker and to get an insight into his thought processes and method of working. So for anyone interested in breaking into this industry, make sure you keep the next hour free to hear Bertie tell you about his experiences filming wildlife all over the world and his journey to becoming a BBC and National Geographic filmmaker. Enjoy. Bertie, thanks so much for taking part in the podcast. We spoke about this many months ago, and I think you're probably one of my hardest guests to track down and meet in the same country at the same time. You've been doing a lot of travelling for many years now, so it's great. And we're in your, I don't know if you call it your hometown of Bristol.
Yeah, I call it, well, ish. Yeah, I guess I live here. Yeah.
No, this is great. It's really exciting. And one thing about leaving it, an extra few months is you've got like more stories to tell. But we're going to do this podcast in a tight hour and cram in as much as we can. Actually, first of all, why don't you tell us? You just got back from New York. What were you doing there?
So in New York, well, I was doing a couple of things. So I do a bit of public speaking for National Geographic. They have a National Geographic Live platform, which they don't do in the UK anymore. I think they used to, but they basically have theatres all around North America and other places around the world. And they have their photographers, filmmakers, scientists, astronauts go and give National Geographic Live presentations. So you do like a 80-minute show to a crowd that can be of like 3,000 people, which is it's pretty exciting because we very rarely, I don't know about you, I find very rarely do you get to see, you work so hard on something that it takes you 2 or 3 years to document, and then the very best audience feedback you get is a couple comments on Instagram, right? It's not really,
sure.
You can't really gauge what someone thinks. If something goes out on television, you don't you have no idea.
Yeah.
And so to actually get live audience feedback is really interesting because you learn what makes people tick and what people don't like. And yeah, just having that direct connection to the audience is really cool.
Great.
That was a very long-winded answer. So I was doing that, and I was also finishing up working on a new online series for National Geographic.
Great.
So we're just coming to the end of that project.
Do you enjoy public speaking? It's part of your, kind of skill set?
Yeah, no, I do enjoy it. Still get really nervous, which I think is definitely a good thing because it means you care. Do I enjoy? Yeah, no, I do. It's good fun, and getting 3,000 people to laugh is like you get a kick out of that for sure. But I think just that direct connection with people, and you can really change the way people think, which I think is quite unique. It's one thing, getting someone to watch a film, but there's something about live storytelling that I think is.
Yeah, I think
it's pretty powerful.
There's that instant connection, isn't it? It's one of the things I love about public speaking is this sort of accountability. If you're doing it quite regularly, you're going to have to be showing new content. And I always say when I public speak that the best thing about it, I feel it's like the best way to show your work, especially on huge screens, like really good quality. I mean,
it's nowhere to hide.
Yeah, exactly. But also, your work is shown, on IMAX size screens,
right?
And you're getting that direct connection to the person that's created that work.
Well, you put something on Instagram and it can be a giant crop and a bit out of focus.
Yeah.
Once you put it on a big old screen on the wall, there's no hiding. If it's out of focus, it's out of focus.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the things, I sort of love and hate Instagram. You reach these huge audiences but you've got all this incredible gear, 5K this, 6K that, and then you're showing it as a tiny little thumbnail.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the last series was shooting on for Nat Geo. Yeah, we were filming in 8K. And when I put a clip from that on Instagram, it's like 800 pixels on the longest edge. It's a bit soul destroying, really.
It really is, but I guess you kind of have to deal with, the main platforms and reaching the biggest audiences.
No, totally. And you know that in certain places it is going to be seen at not that quality, but that quality will be useful.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's go back a little bit. I mean, I've been doing my research on you. You've done loads of interviews,
it's creepy,
podcasts. A bit weird. I know you're my mate, and now I'm like kind of
stalking.
Finding out to dredge up some dirt. No, not at all. But I want to talk about what you're up to currently in the future and stuff. But it would be worth there may be some people, Bertie, I don't want to crush your ego, that might not have heard of you when they listen to this, and it would be really good just to touch a bit on your background and how you got into doing what you do. Because one of the things that I thought was funny about this is, how old are you now?
25.
So you're 25. And I remember you called me up as a 17-year-old.
I totally fanboyed you. Yeah.
And I remember getting this call from Bertie, and I was asking, I'd just finished this book on Vancouver Island. I've been photographing there for 5 years. And then this British kid calls me up. He's like, I've spent some time on Vancouver Island, and I see you have, and I just want to get some advice. And then you started talking to me about, Pelly cases and drilling holes in them, and will a bear attack it if I tie it to this tree? And I was thinking, wow, this is really advanced stuff. Like, I hadn't thought about doing any of this stuff for my book. And then, of course, that year and a few years later, you were doing all of that stuff and getting some really great image with pocket wizards and wide angle shots of wolves on beaches. And I mean, I'm kind of answering your question, but sort of going back to that, I mean, even before that, you were already into nature photography. So what kind of got you started? What was your spark?
Well, I mean, I guess going all the way back, my family were really into water sports. Yeah. And from when I was really young, I was going down to the sea and on, local lakes and stuff, learning to surf and do all kinds of water sports. And I guess when you spend, a lot of your childhood bobbing up and down on a surfboard off the Cornish coast, you're going to develop some kind of appreciation for wildlife, or at least being outside.
Sure.
And I guess, that was where it started. And then, my dad's interested in photography, not professionally, but like as a hobby. So I guess I was always around cameras when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. And then I was lucky that I lived just outside of Reading, just west of London. And there was the I guess, was it a village or like a small town, I guess, that I lived in. And really near to where I lived was this massive extent of like farmers' fields.
Yeah.
That was where my family, we used to go like walk our dog there. And I go into these fields and suddenly I realise, I'm not saying that farmers' fields are particularly brilliant places for wildlife, but, they have some really cool animals that, eke out a niche there. And I started to realise there were all these cool animals that I could go and find. And I just got more and more obsessed. And I started to just sneak off. I think it's when I was, 14, 15. I started to just sneak off for hours on end by myself. As soon as I got home from school, I just buzzed straight out into these fields and sneak up on whatever I could find. And it was all by trial and error.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to sneak up on a roe deer without spooking it. And for sure, I probably spooked quite a few roe deers when I was... But then over time, by trial and error, you figure out how to get close to animals, approaching them from downwind and, using cover and stuff like that. And a lot of these skills that I was developing, I don't think I even realised I was developing, which I now use like professionally on a day-to-day basis, which seems mad that, even when you're halfway around the other side of the world filming for the BBC, you're using a skill that you developed as a 15-year-old, like crawling in a muddy puddle on a roe deer in Reading.
You weren't reading, how to watch wildlife books when you were 14?
Well, no, because I mean, maybe there are those books that exist. I'm sure there are, but I think trial and error is, I think often a really good way to learn. And you'll make lots of mistakes, but you'll learn from those mistakes.
Yeah.
So I guess everyone thought I was really weird at school because I'd, spend all my spare time sneaking up on animals. But I found that if I took pictures of what I saw, that was suddenly a really good way to, one, explain where I'd been. And also I realised if I got pictures of, really clear pictures of animals that people didn't otherwise get close to, stuff like a roe deer. It's actually quite hard to get near.
Of course, yeah.
Or a kingfisher. Like the reaction you could get from people was really cool.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, if I can get other people excited about something I'm excited about, that's good fun.
Yeah.
And it just kind of went from there, I guess.
And I guess it's a lovely thing to say that you're having that kind of experience as a kid that doesn't really know anything but just going through trial and error, but it's sort of very much what you're doing today is filming and photographing stuff that gets you excited.
Well, totally. I mean, the buzz and I mean this totally honestly, the buzz I get from seeing a polar bear in the Canadian Arctic, I find that just as exciting as when I was 14, sneaking up on a buzzard,
Yeah. And that's what keeps you going. It's addictive, isn't it? I think there probably is like a bit of a hunter.
Oh, it's totally caveman instinct. Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're shooting, wildlife with a camera, not with a gun, and there is that thrill of getting close. And I just recently watched the final episode of your first series, and that moment with the wolf is just. Well, it just, it sums everything up about why you do what you do, and it's lovely. And we'll talk a little bit more about the wildlife series. In case I forget to mention, we'll put it in the notes and stuff at the end. But for the listeners who haven't watched Bertie, it was your first series for Nat Geo, right? And it was also not just your first series, but it was also their first series.
It was their first online wildlife series.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit about that and the kind of, how you ended up making this? And
well, it was a ridiculously long series of events, so I'd try and do the short version. So I was really obsessed with British wildlife, sneaking up on roe deer down the road from where I lived. I decided that I wanted to enter my pictures into young wildlife photography competitions, and there's a few of those. Wildlife Photography of the Year, British Wildlife Photography of the Year, and then this random one came up on Google that advertised for a position on this project called 2020 Vision.
Yeah.
And little did I know that project was going to have such a significant impact on how fast, I guess, my career developed. I just thought it was this cool competition and got in touch with this guy called Pete Cairns, who I'd never heard of before. And it turned out he was quite a big deal in the wildlife photography wildlife photography world. And through that project, basically got sent around. Well, our job, there was 20 of the UK's top professional wildlife photographers, and then they went on this search to find 20 upcoming young photographers, and I was lucky enough to be selected as one of those, and was getting to work with getting to shoot alongside some of the best photographers in the UK, which was an amazing opportunity for me, like a little whippersnapper, not having a clue.
Brilliant.
I mean, the patience that people like Alex Mustard had, one of the world's best underwater photographers. I went on a shoot with him in Cornwall. Terry Whitaker. We spent days photographing urban herons in London. And so that project, I was meeting all these amazing people and learning all these skills. The guys that run that, Pete Cairns and Mark Hamlin, I definitely owe a huge amount to.
But in this stage, it's only stills you're doing.
That was all stills, yeah. So during that project, they said, we want you to do city wildlife. I was like, well, how's that fair? Alex Mustard gets to go and play with seals off the Devon coast. Andy Rouse is doing wild boar in the Forest of Dean, and I've got to go and hang out with rats and pigeons. And it turns out I was totally wrong. Sure. I found out, whilst I'm not saying that cities are good places for wildlife, they are terrible places for most animals, but there is a handful of them that do really well in cities. I've discovered that you can have these experiences in a city with wildlife that are just as exciting, just as crazy as anywhere else. You just got to think about it a bit differently.
Definitely.
Discovered peregrine falcons and red foxes and urban great tits and all kinds of animals. And long story short, this is a long story.
It's fine.
So I took a couple pictures of urban peregrines, particularly I guess the other thing to say is that because I was taking pictures of urban wildlife, I mean, now I think urban wildlife photography is pretty fashionable. That's a cool thing to do, right? I think at the time it wasn't as big. I'm definitely not saying I was a pioneer of urban wildlife photography, but it wasn't as much of a norm as it is now, I think.
No, I think that Laurent Geslin was doing some
exactly. He
stuff.
Was a pioneer for sure. And because I guess my images were more unique than if I was just photographing peregrines in a wilder setting, peregrine falcons in a wilder setting, it meant that my pictures got noticed.
Of course.
And I had pictures like I got one of a juvenile peregrine falcon flying in front of a big Union Jack flag on the Houses of Parliament.
Incredible shot. Yeah.
I mean, it was so lucky, so jammy. Off that picture got noticed. It got lots of publicity as a result. And then
we've got a bunch of kids outside, but this is
they're having a great time.
The nature of the podcast.
This peregrine falcon picture got a lot of press, and as a result of that, I got to speak at Wild Photos, which is a really cool platform because it attracts some of the best wildlife photographers in the world. Namely, that year, Steve Winter is one of National Geographic magazine's top wildlife photographers, and he was looking for a new assistant. And I was like, wow, this is my golden ticket, Willy Wonka style. This is my chance. Unfortunately, the other 599 people at that event had the same idea.
Yeah.
But I thought, I was giving a presentation there, so I figured,
you had a platform, right?
I had a platform, and I had 15 minutes when no one could interrupt me. That was my interview.
So you've got your public speaking, well prepared. You've got such a short amount of time, but you've also got this sub story going on where I'm going to try and snag this job at the same time.
Totally, yeah. It was like I treated it as a job interview, really.
Yeah.
And being the, I think it was 17, 18 when I did that, being the cocky gobshite that I was, I took the piss out of Steve's American accent because I thought, you go big or go home, right? Unfortunately, he found it funny. After my presentation, he offered me a job, and I thought about it for, 0.2 seconds.
That's your sliding doors moment, isn't it? What if it had bombed? Maybe you would have given up and you'd be like...
It would have been really awkward in the short term, never mind any other repercussions. So off the back of that, I then, for the next 2 years, basically followed round Steve Winter on assignment for National Geographic magazine. It was insane. So the day after I graduated from university, I did zoology here in Bristol. Literally the day after, I left graduation early to get go pack my stuff and then get on a plane and start working for Steve.
And at this stage, did you know, you'd already played with film. Of course, the advent of shooting high definition around that time with DSLRs was significant. And did you know that that's what you wanted to do as a photographer? You started out very much doing stills. when did you have this idea that, I actually want to move into the moving image and be a cameraman?
Well, so I started to shoot video a little bit before that. And I guess from the very beginning, I grew up watching David Attenborough documentaries. And, like many people, I think, that are in this industry, that's, why lots of people start, because of those Attenborough BBC documentaries. And rather embarrassingly, and I'd probably never say this to National Geographic, so hopefully they don't listen to this.
I'm hoping they will.
When I was growing up, I never thought I want to work for National Geographic.
Right.
It was always the David Attenborough documentaries. Yeah. And I think that's just because in the UK, that's, our version of National Geographic.
Of course.
And if I was in the US, then it would have been National Geographic. Obviously I recognise the significance of it is on the same level. I mean, in stills, there's no organisation better than National Geographic for stills. So it was an amazing opportunity, and getting to work for Steve was awesome. But as you say, the video side of things, I kind of started making my own little short films before, and that was really key, I think, when I was working for Steve, because I was his photo stills assistant.
Right.
He's known for camera traps.
Sure.
And that requires a lot of technical stuff. And so my job, first and foremost, was to try and make his camera traps work. Yeah. Which is a pain in the ass.
Were you also hired to document what he was doing as a photographer, or were you more kind of, Bertie, can you help me?
Ish. I mean, as an assistant, for sure that is part of the job. But I mean, what I realised on our first shoot in South Africa was that it was like, hang on a second. We're having all of these amazing experiences. We're filming photographing leopards. We're having all these amazing experiences. And I mean, from this particular shoot for this worldwide leopard story, it's probably going to be 3 pictures. We were there for like 2.5 months.
Yeah.
So we're having all these amazing wildlife experiences that I know will probably never see the light of day. And suddenly, if I shoot video of Steve and of the leopards, well, that's like a whole nother avenue. And, selfishly, that means that I'm creating stuff and not stepping on Steve's toes. You hear lots of stories about assistants, shooting alongside Nat Geo photographers, and there is some luck involved to an extent, and you might just get a shot that they don't manage for whatever reason, and then that's just not a situation that is a good one to be in. That's just not how it works.
Involved, and
it's just not how. It's not a good one to be involved in. So if I was shooting video, then suddenly we would like doing things that all my stuff was complementing Steve, and so, I mean, I've been lucky enough to have. I've already talked about a couple of the mentors I've had. People like Pete Cairns, Mark Hamblin, Andy Rouse, Alex Mustard. Then I guess my next phase of mentors was having Steve Winter. He, is one of the few, I think, National Geographic photographers that really cares, deeply about the success of his assistants. Yes. I think he really does. He's very selfless. And so it was such a great platform working for him, because I could then go into loads of the offices at National Geographic and say, I'm Steve Winter's assistant, and suddenly that is your,
Yeah, and it must be really nice for him as well to see how you've flourished, as a result of that experience and doing your own thing with them as well. And are you still in touch with him? And do you get to see him?
Every now and again we see each other. I wish it was more. I hope that we'll work on another project together one day. That'd be fun. Anyway, in answer to your question, which I started answering about 15 minutes ago, how did the first National Geographic's, the series that I worked on for National Geographic Wildlife come about? So while I was working for Steve, I was getting to know, so my job developed from not just assisting Steve, I was now shooting video for a television program about Steve and the animals we were filming. Yeah. So I got to know the people at National Geographic Television, and they said, well, you're not totally useless on camera, so think about pitching some stuff, some solo projects to work, you can do in your side time. And because I'd, been on Vancouver Island, like you mentioned earlier, spent 2 seasons helping a wildlife tour guide out there on his bear watching boat, I knew that patch. Yeah. And so I applied for a National Geographic Young Explorers grant. They're now called Early Career Grants. Mm-hmm. And that's such an amazing way to get in with National Geographic. Yeah. Because you don't need to know anyone within National Geographic. It helps in the grant process if you do, but you don't need to. You just need to have an idea that you're really passionate about. In my case, it was about going to find coastal wolves and getting more people excited about coastal wolves, because I had this horrible situation where I got to know this wolf pack really well, and tragically the alpha female and one of her pups was shot. And it was just, it was crap. So I thought, well, if we can get more people excited about coastal wolves, I think people care about what they know about. Lots of people haven't heard of coastal wolves. If we get more people excited about coastal wolves, maybe stupid stuff like that won't happen again. And so I pitched it to National Geographic as a television program, and they said no.
Right.
I was like, all right, cool. Right, now what? Unfortunately, the head of Nat Geo Studios at the time, Brooke Runette, was like, okay, well, we don't want to do a TV show. What if we do an online series? And
they hadn't done one before.
They'd never done an online, a digital first, so online first wildlife series. So they'd done series where it was, a TV show, and then they'd cut stuff up to put online, right? But never a digital first.
Just dedicated.
That was what it was going to be first. Whether it was made into a TV show after was a separate thing. And it was, for various reasons, it took a long time for the backstage stuff to come together. But meanwhile, I had this grant and I was going. I had these set dates. So I just went out there and had 3 months on Vancouver Island, just figuring it out and going, right, so we've got to film coastal wolves, but we want to tell a much bigger story about all the amazing characters there, the black bears, the bald eagles, the sea otters, all that stuff. And yeah, it was a bit stressy because I didn't actually find coastal wolves for a long time.
But you said that's what you were going to get. I mean, did you spend with pitching something like that, do you have to spend a lot of time, doing spreadsheets and convincing people that, this is the story and this is how it's going to work and this is the script, or how does that kind of work?
Well, with that particular series, it was kind of like the Wild West, this like digital first platform. So, I mean, I got good at talking about how I was going to find coastal wolves, but it didn't really dawn on me until I got there. And, I'd been so lucky with the coastal wolf family that I'd kind of hung out with before.
That you thought
I accepted that was the norm. And it turns out like I've never had an experience like that since. When you get there and suddenly you can't film these wolves, and everyone, people like Joel Sartori, Paul Nicklin, the top Nat Geo photographers, they famously all say that, you're only as good as your last story,
right.
And this was my first.
Yeah.
So, like, you cock up your first story, you're in trouble.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess, in the end, I made it work and had this amazing intimate encounter.
I kind of spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, but it is, it's a wonderful moment, and actually I was interested in asking you about that format, because it seemed to me like, Planet Earth, BBC were doing this sort of 10 or so years ago, the diaries and the behind the scenes and looking at the effort that goes into getting these shots. And you very much geared your series around that.
Right.
And you as the personality and you as the storyteller and the cameraman. And that's something that I think worked, really, really well. It's great to see. It's exciting. And it feels like there's that connection. And tell us a little bit about that idea and making that work, because they're also quite short episodes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's evolved a lot since that first season, and now we're making much longer episodes for it. They're now between 9 and 12 minutes long, rather than 3 to 5 minutes.
Sure.
And I guess how I've lost my train of thought.
No worries. It was just
so how did the style come about?
Yeah.
Sorry, I got memory loss like a goldfish. So how it came about was, I grew up watching these Attenborough documentaries, and really annoyingly, whenever you talk to when you talk to a significant number of people that aren't interested in wildlife, the bit that they talk about, or the bit that you overhear, is the bit at the end where they show you how they did it, which is really annoying, because that's the bit that least amount of time is spent doing.
Yeah.
And really, it should be about the animals. But I think the reason why that part is so popular is because it's relatable.
Of course.
If you see a polar bear standing on an iceberg, most of us will never see a polar bear standing on an iceberg.
Sure.
But suddenly, when you see someone really scared because they're so close to this massive predator, or really excited, or struggling to get a shot, or getting a shot. Just seeing some kind of human emotion with that, I think it suddenly brings it to life.
Totally, and that's what I really loved about in quite a few of your episodes. It's beautifully shot. It's fun as well. It's really creative. But you've also got lots of stuff about missed opportunities. Like with the bald eagles, lots of shots of them out of the frame, out of focus, and you do that quite a bit. And I think that's quite a nice story to tell, that it's hard work and you have to spend a lot of time doing it. Yes, it is a glamorous life and it's lovely being out there, but there's pressure on, especially if you've got a budget and time to work to, and we both know how bad the weather can be on Vancouver Island. But showing that that's something that they talk about a lot in the diary section, but I think they miss actually showing the kind of shots that don't work, which I think was really nice to see.
Well, I think everyone loves seeing people mess up.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's something about that's quite satisfying.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing is that when you're watching these making ofs, I think a lot of the time, well, not necessarily with the making ofs, but when you see like wildlife adventure programs, people, I think often, certainly, there's with male hosts, it's all about like man versus nature. And it's like, come on, it's so boring. And it's like, oh, I'm going to climb up that mountain because I want to conquer it. It's like, no, you want to climb up that mountain because the view at the top's going to be awesome and you want to like hug a mossy log. And I think, just not taking yourself too seriously and embracing the times when stuff's not going to plan.
Yeah.
Because that's real. I think that's hopefully how you're going to connect with people.
Yeah, and it's part of the journey. And
I like to feel people can see through when you're BSing them. When you're taking yourself really seriously, and I think it's nice to kind of shatter that illusion.
Completely. You said something which I was really interested in, and also a really good bit of information. I mentioned to you earlier, through the analytics I have now on this podcast, I know a lot of young people listen to it and people searching for new sources of information. And, you mentioned about these grants that National Geographic give out, and you don't have to be, connected or have a foot in the door, and there's cronyism. It's just, they will accept something if it's a good idea. And again, I remember, talking to you many years ago about, this kind of confidence and you being quite young and that being an unusual thing when a lot of people are figuring out what they're doing at your age. You're just getting on and doing it. And one of the things that really stuck with me that you said many years ago was that you just asked for stuff, and you just made it sound really, really simple. And I think that's in many ways, and it resonated with me, is that a lot of people have fears about, putting themselves out there or showing their work. But it seems like that, and of course, I'm sure, you have your insecurities and you have met rejection, but just doing that and going for stuff and asking for it is really quite a simple bit of advice for young people that are, listening to this and want to kind of perhaps follow your path and go on that journey.
Well, I think that confidence is a big thing, and I think there's a real balance because, networking is such an important part of the wildlife filmmaking industry, in that people want to work with people that they like, because if you're going to go and be on a shoot with someone, you live on top of each other for 6 weeks, you better get on. You can be the best camera person in the world, but if you're an asshole, no one's going to want to hire you. And so I think it's just, I guess, having the confidence to go up to people and be nice to them, but then at the same time, it's got to be genuine, right? It can't, people see through fakery. And I guess on the other side of that is, if you are going to be confident about something, you better make sure you can do what you say you can do.
Sure.
Because it's all well and good having confidence, but there's nothing more of a turn-off than overconfidence that isn't backed up. The amount of times I've been on shoots and, someone said that they can do something, and it's like, okay, well, let's see how this goes. And it turns out, they can't. They were over-promising.
Wow.
It's just super embarrassing.
Yeah.
And not only is it super embarrassing, it's not productive. So I guess, yes, have loads of confidence, but just make sure you can back it up, because otherwise it's going to be really embarrassing. And it's not going to turn out well.
Yeah, that's great.
And I guess to your point of just asking for stuff, I think in the context of I don't know how to say this, how to phrase it, but just like try and if you get a really cool opportunity, take it, but then try and not make it more, but take advantage of it. As an example with Steve, like I was hired as his assistant, but it's like, okay, well, what can I do to take this on to another level? Okay, let's shoot loads of video. And then suddenly I can go from just being his assistant, that's not an amazing role,
of course,
but now I'm, shooting alongside him in my own right. And with 2020 vision, okay, they say that they're going to let you, tag along on a couple of the pro photographer shoots. You get 2 weeks in the year hanging out with them. We'll spend the other 50 weeks by yourself, sneaking up on peregrine falcons in the streets of London, and maybe it will lead to something. Yeah. Maybe it won't, but I guess it's just using your initiative and just doing it, because I met lots of people my age and younger at film festivals and stuff, and they say, because I've been lucky enough to have a platform with National Geographic, they say, okay, let's do something, or how do I go be a wildlife cameraman or whatever, or camerawoman. We'll just, like, to start with, go do it. Whether that's if you live in the middle of a city, there's wildlife here, or whether that's you're living in Botswana in Africa, just go out and do it.
Yeah, and it's great.
And fail, because fail's awesome.
Of course,
fail is awesome.
Yeah, and embrace that. And I think seizing the moment is a really good message to come from that, because we are so lucky now. I know I've spoken to a lot of photographers who started on film, and it's just unbelievable the opportunities we have. And one of my previous guests, Chris Ryan, we talked about how digital photography really democratized photography. So you can go and get an entry-level DSLR that shoots high-def video, and you can make a really good quality film, like you say, in your own backyard, or do something and get, it's about the storytelling. You do have to get good shots, of course, but I mean, that's what you started on. I mean, one of your first films was just
But never mind that, everyone's got a camera in their pocket.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, the videos that go, I mean, I don't think we should rate videos on whether they go viral or not, but how many viral videos are there of really cool wildlife moments that are shot on people's phones? Yeah. And that's because it's not about filming it beautifully. It's about amazing behavior and amazing stories. Yes, if you can film amazing behavior and amazing stories well, then that's the gold star level, which is obviously what we're trying to do with big wildlife series. Yeah. But yeah, it's spending the time and I guess seeing interesting things or trying to see
doing it. Just getting out there and doing it. And it takes time. It really does take time. And I'm 42 this year, and I'm kind of feeling like, there's the race against time. I've got to get more content. And one of the great things I think that's why a lot of the photographers that are really, there and doing great stuff with National Geographic are that little bit older, because they've got this, vast experience that they can draw on, and, to create these stories and seize the moment when they're in the field and doing that. I mean, you're a little bit of exception to that at being 25, but that experience is so important.
And the thing that all those guys have in common, that incredible generation of legendary Nat Geo photographers, I think they're all very different and skilled in different areas, but the thing they all have in common is that they're all absolute work machines.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I often think about that. I occasionally listen to Desert Island Discs. I always find it fascinating, people that have achieved stuff at a high level, whether it's science, arts or whatever. And the common thing through all of their stories is just how dedicated they are and how hard they work. And, I run photography workshops, and often people that come on them are, they don't come on with a great deal of confidence, which of course is why they're there, so I can help them learn. But one of the things they say is, I just don't have a creative eye. And I often think, well, that's just an excuse, because you can go out and you can just practice and you can work, and the numbers of photography can be a bit boring, learning the difference, that changing your aperture makes or your shutter speed.
Right.
It's sometimes, it takes a long time to really master that and get your head around that.
But that stuff is all totally not irrelevant's the wrong word, but that stuff all needs to be second nature by the time you're actually doing it. You know, if you go, go meet up with a bunch of wildlife camera people, and they're going to be talking about animal experiences that they had. They're not going to be talking about what shutter speed they used.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. I want to come on and talk about your second series, but first, and you touched on it earlier, about this difference between, or your expectations about being a cameraman for the BBC versus Nat Geo, and now, Netflix have kind of upped the ante and thrown in, they got Attenborough. That's big, and I read this article that he said, it's, of course I'm going to still do BBC stuff, but the audience is just so big, and I wonder what your thoughts were on that, and the with TV on demand and reaching people online, it's just even bigger than the BBC, dare we say it,
Yeah, I mean, it seems like every man and his dog are making their version of Planet Earth at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think it's great because it just shows that there's appetite for natural history. I just hope that, people are making these series for the right reasons and that the quality stays high, because, the reason that basically any wildlife film you've ever seen has probably been made in Bristol is because this is where the expertise is, and it's come from people that have originally worked at the BBC Natural History Unit.
Yeah.
And there's only so many people to make these documentaries, so I just hope that there's enough people to, enough really talented and experienced producers, which there are lots of in Bristol. Hope there's enough to keep up with all of these series that are being made.
Yeah, sure. Does it mean you've got the option for more work when more people are doing it?
Yeah. Oh well, I mean, it's brilliant at the moment. There's I've speaking to some of the I'm a total whippersnapper right at the start.
Yeah.
But you speak to some camera people that have been doing it 20, 30 years, and they're like, this is a crazy time. This is everyone's I can't even remember, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago they said that it was on the way down, and now it's just skyrocketing.
Amazing.
It's golden age for sure. It's just a shame that it's not a golden age for the natural world.
No, it isn't.
It's quite the opposite. And I just hope, again, coming back to that, I hope people are making these films for the right reasons. We've got an amazing responsibility, given that we have such privileged access to the natural world, to make sure that actually the stuff that we make isn't just entertainment. Yeah. I think primarily it has to be entertaining, because that's how you reach maximum number of people. But it's got to have that.
It's got to have the message. We're going to come on to that, and not to put a block on it, but I think it'd be an interesting thing to finish on. I just wanted to, and you said earlier, you're only as good as your last film. So you got the great
first film.
Yeah, your first film. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks. You're only as good as your first film. Yeah. I'm tired. I've got a 1-year-old. It did say that on my notes. And then you did it. You did a great job. And then was it easier then pitching the second idea with a slightly different format, filming in South Georgia? Yeah, I mean,
it was kind of a funny story as to how the second season came for wildlife, in that the first season I think did well, off the top of my head, something like 40 million views, which was amazing, to reach that many people. It was really exciting, and it was well received outside Nat Geo and within Nat Geo, which is important. And it took ages actually. You'd think that commissioning is a really long process. And it's stuff seems to take a really long time, and then once it's actually happening, it's very quick. So you'll wait a year for an answer, and then suddenly it's like, make a decision, and you're like, panic.
And you've got to do it in 3 weeks.
Exactly. No, 3 hours. It's crazy. So I had a couple of different ideas for what I wanted to do for season 2 of Wildlife, but the one that really stuck out was South Georgia, because from a totally selfish perspective, it was it's the holy grail of wildlife filmmaking. or not wildlife filmmaking, just holy grail of wildlife. You know, it's this tiny little sub-Antarctic island that is such an adventure to get to, and it's these giant, 3,000 meter snow-capped mountains that erupt out the ocean, and it's covered in penguins and seals, and all the animals don't have fear of people. It's it's the dream, right? So there was that reason for going there, but also the main reason I wanted to go there was because it had such an amazing story. In that you'd think that because it's so wild, so remote, and has such a crazy density of wildlife there, that it was totally untouched, one of those last pristine areas.
Yeah.
That's totally not true. We totally destroyed the place.
Yeah.
And it's made this amazing comeback thanks to some brilliant conservation efforts. That said, it now faces a whole new set of challenges. And so it's just such a interesting story, I think, and a powerful one that I hope that, based on those conservation successes, we can show, well, okay, this is what happens when environmental conditions are right. You care enough. There's good government. Resources are put in the right places. Mm-hmm. Why can't we do that in other places?
Yes. Yeah. So you're using it as almost like a model for say, look, this is what you can have with the right level of protection.
Yeah.
Let's do that here. And it's brilliant, again, it's nice that it's I love all the graphics in it. It's really, beautifully, creatively told, but with that same point of view, you being the protagonist in these and
well, on that note, actually, I should say that one of the great things about wildlife filming is that unlike stills, which is often a very solo endeavor, with wildlife filming, you're in such big teams.
Yeah.
Okay, you might be in very small teams in the field, but there's so many awesome people that you get to work with.
Yeah.
And as a host, as a presenter, you often get a lot of the credit, which is totally unfair because I'm surrounded by people that basically just cover up my mistakes, basically, the wonders of editing. And so that to me is one of the cool parts is that working in these really interesting teams. I mean, on Wildlife Season 2 about South Georgia, the team was actually crazy because in the field, there was me from England, there was Erin Rainey, who's our camera assistant, amazing girl, that she does some amazing stuff in Alaska, lives in Washington State. Mm-hmm. And then we had Spencer Millsap, who's this guy from Texas that I originally met like at the start of Nat Geo.
Great.
When I first started working for Nat Geo. And then there was the editing team was in New York. The like boss team, the Nat Geo team is obviously in DC where Nat Geo is based. And then we had this multinational team, like the editor was from Spain, the series producers from Belgium, the musicians that composed the music were from another part of Spain. Yeah, it was this crazy international team that all got to work together, and yeah.
That's brilliant. And did, looking at the credits of that, of course, and you're right, they're a really it's a group effort, and you as I know I'm sure you're at a stage now, but at the beginning there's this level of control around your work and your footage and how you want to tell the story, and there's ego involved as well. I mean, you mentioned to me you've got to finish and edit, and I'm interested, so you're editing as well, or what kind of input can you get when you're in these offices and you're working with editors? Do they even like you being around? Do they want your input? It's just like, no, this is our job, you're out there doing the filming, bugger off, mate. Yeah,
no, it's especially when when I've done it, when been lucky enough to work for BBC, and often, every time when I've been on a shoot for them, for, the big David Attenborough series, you basically are a gun for hire. You turn up, everything's been organised, all the permits have been done, your gear, everything. You turn up, you film for them, you hand over the hard drives at the end of the shoot, and you go home. And that is sometimes really nice, and sometimes like, what's going to happen to that? Yeah. Whereas with this Nat Geo stuff, it's the total opposite end, in that I've researched the idea, got the permits, organised the logistics, gone out there in the field, assembled this team, and suddenly there's all this pressure on you.
It's Bertie Gregory Productions for National Geographic.
But it's your baby, and you're so attached to it, and so when it gets you go into the edit and people are saying, I hate that scene, and I look, it's like
You're
daggers,
vulnerable.
right, exactly, yeah. And so I've been really lucky in the team I've got to work with at a production company called The Front, who are in New York.
Yeah.
We have a really nice relationship in that they really care what I think, and the nice thing is that they're not, well, it's different, but they're not wildlife people. And so sometimes they'll come up with ideas that are like biologically just inaccurate, and I'll have to be like, no,
Right.
that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And they totally respect that. And then at the same time, because they're not wildlife people, they come up with storytelling ideas that wildlife people would never have thought
Sure.
of. So it's a really nice balance between the two because we value each other's opinions.
Yeah.
And I think that it is all about collaboration. And so I never want to be involved in a series where I have editorial control, where I have total dictatorship or someone else has total dictatorship over me, because that's not how you make good stuff.
And you need the conflict, don't you? You do need those battles.
Oh, totally.
In the
Yeah, no,
to...
big arguments make the best results. And often when someone says, I hate that about the film, like, I'm really against that, and you totally disagree, and then a month later when you've come to this horrible compromise, a month later you're like, actually, yeah, I'm glad you said that. You were right. That is, yeah, I was married to that idea because that shot took me 2 weeks to get. It wasn't the best story it wasn't the best shot for the story, but I was emotionally attached to it because it took me 2 weeks to get.
Yeah, and you've got to be ruthless in the edit, absolutely. Well, so where can people? I mean, I'm going to put these in the notes, but where's the best place for people to see these series?
Yeah, so season 2, which was about the island of South Georgia, it's called the season was called Resurrection Island.
Yeah.
So a couple places you can watch that. natgeo.com/wildlife.
Okay.
On the National Geographic website, which is probably the easiest, quickest way of remembering it. But they're also on National Geographic Facebook and National Geographic YouTube. And there's all kinds of clips on Snapchat. I mean, the really nice thing about National Geographic is that they have, they have the largest. Let me get this right. They have the largest following on social media of any non-celebrity brand. Bigger than Coca-Cola, bigger than the NFL. It's bigger than Premier League. It's huge.
It's incredible.
And so using that platform, we can really scattergun stuff across different platforms and tailor it towards different platforms.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it?
And have this amazing reach.
Yeah.
So I never thought that when I started making wildlife films that I was going to be doing a quiz on National Geographic Snapchat and reaching a bunch of 13-year-olds that you'd otherwise have no way of hitting.
Yeah, but it's cheesy. They're the future. You can inspire these kids at a young age, and you get them hooked, and it's
totally. And some of them you don't hook.
Yeah, of course.
Who's that freak? Yeah.
So we're going to slowly come to an end here, and we touched a bit on the the responsibility that wildlife photographers and cameramen, storytellers have. Everybody involved. It was interesting actually when I was speaking to Jasper earlier in one of the earlier podcasts. He was a judge on the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and they had this conversation about what does the Wildlife Photographer of the Year want to be. And it's, in a way, it has this huge responsibility of millions of people are going to see these images. So what's the message we want to get across? And I guess that's very much the same about what you're doing and all other people that are making these nature documentaries. And I was doing a bit of research today, and I read just today in The Guardian, there was this new report on the state of, for example, biomass of wild mammals has fallen by 82%. Natural ecosystems have lost half their area, and 1 million species at risk of extinction. So my question to you is, what are you going to do to fix this?
Well, it's not laugh. That's a nervous laugh.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's like a big question. So let's try and break it down. I guess the first thing is, as you said earlier, there's this amazing, and I think the word amazing is right, amazing responsibility that we have access to a huge audience with platforms like National Geographic.
Yes.
You better make sure you're telling the right message. And I mean, if you wanted to max out your viewership on social media, for example, the best way of doing that, to literally just max out your following, would be to take pictures and videos of owls and otters and funny animals like squirrels, 3 animals that just people go nuts for on Instagram. And you just scattergun with that, right? But you might be getting a cheap laugh out of people, but really you got to ask yourself, what's the point? It's like, oh, great, I got 7,000 likes. It's like, well, for sure we want to reach lots of people. And sometimes you got to do stuff like that to a certain extent, going for cute stories and stuff so you reach bigger audiences that you'd otherwise hit. But yeah, there's this massive responsibility to make sure that you're telling people the truth.
Yes.
Because, if you show, I don't know, a bunch of penguins that are traveling each year for, they're tied to their nesting island, like the macaroni penguin on South Georgia. If you show these little penguins having a lovely time, getting chased by seals and feeding their chicks, but you don't mention the fact that actually, because of stuff we humans are doing, changing the climate, it means that these penguins are having to forage further from their homes, and ultimately that means less food for the chicks, so they're going extinct. I mean, that's an example of wildlife conservation, which I think is sounds to someone that necessarily doesn't care about wildlife. It sounds like something that we're just doing because it's a nice thing to do, right? Oh, we're losing penguins. Well, they're pretty cool. We should probably look after them. There's that side of things, but from a totally human, selfish perspective, we rely on nature and wildlife for so many, everything we do, but, a couple things, fresh water, clean air, productive soils, crazy things that we take for granted. So there's this responsibility to do that. And I think trying to make it exciting and accessible. And I think also one thing is providing a sense of hope, because it is very depressing. We're in a lot of trouble. That said, there are solutions to these problems. We have a lot of the solutions we have already. It's not just this thing, we'll figure it out in 20 years time. No, we've got loads of the solutions. If we use our land more efficiently, eat less meat, reforest massive areas, set up marine protected areas so that certain places are going to thrive, and then that's going to overflow and ultimately give more fish for us people. There's so many things that we can do on a practical level that I don't think often get the media attention that they deserve. So I mean, to say that we're totally smashing that one out of the ballpark and we've got that figured out is not true, because there's so many different factors that you have to weigh in when making programs to please various different people. But it's just trying to make sure that you push as hard as you can to make sure that stuff is in there.
And is that, for example, your next project, if you can talk about that would be great. But I mean, going into that mindset of I've got a responsibility, I need to tell the truth, and this balance of also having amazing footage, new techniques, new cameras, striking that balance. How much are you kind of trying to push that story? So actually, hold on, this is more important. I care less about, you obviously still have to get good footage, but the story of this is really important, because in 20 years I might not be able to film this macaroni penguin again or something like that.
And I guess the latest series that I'm working on, I can't say too much about it, but it's about the Canadian Arctic,
right?
And the Arctic is a place that's warming faster than almost anywhere on the planet, and the majority of the animals there their lives revolve around sea ice, and that sea ice is disappearing, and those animals are disappearing. Fact. There's no arguments about that. Anyone that tells you otherwise is BSing you. That's not true. It's
not a conspiracy.
It's not a conspiracy. It's happening. And you talk to people there that have worked there all their lives, guiding or fishermen or whatever, and they're like, this stuff is disappearing in front of our eyes. It's not an abstract concept that's over 100 years. It's literally in front of their eyes, year on year, disappearing. And I guess you've got to tell that story, but then also, again, it comes back to that connection. Everyone on the planet should care that we're losing sea ice. Not because polar bears are going extinct, because let's be honest, whilst it's a very cool thing to look after polar bears, most people, it's not a thing that they have time to even care about. But the reason we should all be worried about sea ice is because, well, it's white and it's one giant mirror, and 90% of the solar radiation that comes from the sun bounces off sea ice and goes straight back out. Whereas, if that ice disappears, which it is, suddenly you've got open water. Well, open water is much darker. It only reflects about 10% of that solar radiation. So it's just heating up the planet. So it's trying to use charismatic animals like polar bears, like Arctic foxes, like all those kinds of animals to get people hooked, and then drip feed them with, the important stuff about why it's actually the sea ice that's the character, not the cute fluffy polar bear.
I can't wait to see the results of this next series and your mission. And do you kind of view yourself as also as almost like a journalist? Whereas, I follow Paul Nicklin, as 5 million others do, and he often refers to himself as a wildlife photojournalist, and I think that definitely seems to be the way certainly nature photographers are going. It's just about being storytellers and having this responsibility.
People enjoy telling stories and people enjoy listening to stories, and that's how you hook people. There's only so much you can show really beautiful imagery. If the story's crap, then people aren't going to get hooked.
Great. I've got a couple more questions before we round up.
Okay.
I was interested in, for someone who was pretty ambitious as a 14-year-old, what are your ambitions now as a 25-year-old that's worked regularly with the BBC and Nat Geo?
I guess making sure that the projects I'm working on are as making as much of an impact as they could be, because it's definitely not much easier, but it's easy to it's not easy to get commissions. What am I talking about? I have no idea. I've only got like 2. I think it's more straightforward to go for topics that are crowd pleasers, right?
Sure.
Getting a really hard hitting conservation film on a channel is hard, but you don't really want to do that unless it's entertaining, because then you're just preaching to the choir. It's just so I guess it's building an audience that trusts you to make trusts you to tell them about interesting things. Working with interesting people, having interesting wildlife experiences. I mean, that's ultimately, whilst of course I really want to make a difference and get people to care about the natural world, and hope that the films that I make directly affect whether that's policy change or specific conservation projects on the ground. Obviously there's also that childlike thing of I want to hang out with cool animals. And
that doesn't go away, I don't think, does it?
But it's also our responsibility that if you're going to, I guess, take advantage of that, you better make sure that those animals are still around.
Yeah. And what about stills? Have you taken any pictures recently?
Not really. Not really out of choice. It's just kind of the way that,
Yeah, it's hard to do both, isn't it?
You can't do both.
Yeah.
Anyone that says you can is bad at one of them or both.
Yeah.
It's just a totally different mindset. Capturing something in a single frame is really, really hard.
Yeah.
That said, if the light's bad or the behavior that you're going for isn't happening, as a stills photographer, your job's done. Whereas when you're shooting video, well, there's, if you get your key piece of behavior, the work then starts, because you're then building out the sequence and trying to tell the whole story.
Yeah. I mean, also, you're so dedicated, and your focus on these projects takes up so much time. What do you think you would have been if you weren't that sliding doors moment? When you're giving that speech and trying to woo Steve Winter, and it bombs, and you have a confidence crisis. You throw your cameras in the bin. What would you have done?
I've never thought. It sounds really cliche and cheesy. I'm gonna say I've never thought about. Nothing else has ever occurred to me to do, and I think I'm really lucky in that I want to get to do something that I love, but also that I've never not known what I wanted to do, and I found that really difficult, especially at university. Being with lots of my friends that lots of them didn't know what they wanted to do, and I just couldn't associate with that. Like I couldn't get my head around how you there wasn't something that you were just totally obsessed by. And no, so lucky to have that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. It totally does. And on that, because there are many people that don't know what they're doing, and people that are listening to this podcast. Have you got any advice, for young people who want to move into this world and try and make it as a Nat Geo cameraman?
Well, I think the first thing to say is ask someone that's done it longer.
Don't listen to Bertie.
Yeah. Well, I found 3 things that work really well. One is take every opportunity you get. Just do it. If someone offers you your first assisting job on, I don't know, the migration of wax wings, and it's your friend's birthday party at the same day. Sorry, friend, gotta go. Because there's 1,000 people queuing up behind you that want to do the same thing. Be the one that's different. And spend every moment of spare time you have, or not even your spare time, spend every moment you can getting outside, learning to get close to animals and meeting people and things. I think the second one is just try and be a nice person, because people want to work with people that they're friends with, and you'll form amazing friendships on these shoots. Because in what other walk of life do you, having often never met someone, spend 6 weeks all day every day with that one person? Like, it's pretty cool the bonds that you form with that. And I've started a list of 3 and I've forgotten the third thing I was going to say. What was I going to say? Take every opportunity. And that'll do.
The third one, if you remember, we'll put in the notes. It's obviously really important. But Bertie,
sounds good.
Thanks so much. We've got to go and grab a pizza and talk more. And I really appreciate your time here. I'm really excited about your next series. When will that come out?
Soon.
Okay. No strict deadline.
Stay tuned. Yeah. I'm going to be that really annoying person and say, I'll best way to find out is on my Instagram. So if you follow my Instagram.
Brilliant.
God, I've said it. That's tragic. That's tragic, isn't it? You're like, follow me on Instagram and you're like it. Yeah.
Bertie, thanks so much. And look forward to seeing more of your work over the coming weeks, months and years, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Bertie. For someone who spends most of the year outside the UK, it was great to catch him in Bristol, the home of the BBC Natural History Unit, and unsurprisingly where so many of my interviews take place. So now his 3rd series of wildlife, entitled The Big Freeze, is out. So I encourage you to take a look. It's pretty incredible. They're also completely free on the Nat Geo channels or on YouTube, and you can find links to all of this and more of Bertie's work on my page on my site, and of course on his website, which is bertiegregory.com. Bertie and all my guests give up their time generously for free for these podcasts, so you can do us all a favour by sharing them on your own channels and by leaving a review on iTunes, which helps get these amazing stories out there to educate and inform a wider audience about these incredibly dedicated people. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back with my next guest towards the end of August. Until then, have a great summer.